Committed documentary practices in digital media cultures. Documentary practices created with and for people affected by social problems have a long tradition. Today, digital media cultures seem to offer new opportunities for participation as well as new documentary forms of expression that can give marginalized positions cultural visibility on a global level, while simultaneously promoting exchange between those concerned. Interactive documentaries on the web, or iDocs, which present documentary content in a non-linear and multimedia form, often not only allow for online participation with user-generated content, but also for equal participation in developing the projects in various phases, which is known as co-creation. iDocs that involve those affected by social issues often pursue several goals that address different groups. Dadaab stories, for example, involve the residents of a refugee camp in Dadaab, Kenya. One aim was to promote communication between the refugees within the camp. At the same time, the intention was also to produce counter-images to the depictions of the camp in established mass media. The initiators wanted to enable the refugees to present themselves as creative individuals, while, according to empirical studies, European news coverage frequently focuses on crises and marginalizes the voices of the people. 𝗏𝘃𝗵𝗶 Black Males was intended to strengthen the dialogue within the African American male community, on the one hand, and to deconstruct prevailing stereotypes about black men on the other. The G-word, transforming gender norms one story at a time, offers a space for exchange about gender norms by allowing those affected by violence and discrimination to share their experiences. Another goal of the project is to poke holes in mainstream narratives about what gender is or should be. What the three projects have in common is that they use the affordances of the digital and participatory practices, firstly, to promote exchange within the group, and secondly, to present counter-discourses to an outside audience. This raises the question of whether and how these two intentions of the individual projects can be reconciled. In the following, I will argue that in engaged iDocs, community experiences and counterpublics that respond to social and cultural exclusion mechanisms are closely linked. Collectively demanding one's socio-cultural participation through doing documentary can foster the feeling of being part of a community. However, the shared aesthetic practices and communicative narrative processes that underlie the community experiences in the project are not always conducive to intervention. The hypothesis of this contribution is that group-specific goals are difficult to reconcile with the promotion of socio-cultural participation of those affected by social problems. To examine the relation between the promotion of socio-cultural participation and community experiences in engaged iDocs, I will first discuss the conditions for intervention through participation, and what distinguishes a virtual community from community experiences. In this context, I will also examine the methodological implications. Subsequently, the three iDocs mentioned serve as examples for the analysis. The conclusion explains why the self-representation of marginalized participants in iDocs and the exchange of their experiences can be useful for a sense of community, but do not always challenge dominant images. In iDocs such as Dadaab stories, people affected by social problems film themselves, presenting themselves and their needs as they wish, and participate conceptually in the design of the documentary project. Their voices come to the fore on the websites in polyphonic arrangements. Kate Nash explains, being heard within the documentary-making process, being able to express oneself is fundamental to the political value of the documentary project. Can participation in iDocs be equated with socio-cultural participation? Furthermore, does it automatically promote an intervention that uses documentary practices to combat exclusion? I argue that self-representation in iDocs does not suffice for socio-cultural participation, but that the reflective approach by participants to their self-image is necessary. This is essential for questioning an aesthetic order shaped by stereotypes, for example. The cultural scientist Wanda Wieczorek explains that cultural participation means one's own cultural production and the confident handling of different cultural forms of expression. If we follow the argumentation of the philosopher Jacques Rancière on the so-called distribution of the sensible, for cultural participation through idocs, content-related participation must also be accompanied by emancipation from prevailing stereotypical images in the sense of overcoming dominant patterns of representation. Rancière's concept of the distribution of the sensible assumes that forms of participation are inscribed in modes of perception. He states, "A partition of the sensible refers to the manner in which a relation between a shared common and the distribution of exclusive parts is determined in sensory experience." This latter form of distribution, which by its sensory self-evidence anticipates the distribution of part and shares, itself presupposes a distribution of what is visible and what not, of what can be heard and what cannot. For those who have no part in the existing order to be seen and heard, a redistribution of the sensible is necessary. In other words, the confrontation of the existing order with the excluded. This means, for example, intervening in the order of perception by breaking with stereotypical representations. Cultural participation can be understood as a prerequisite for social participation. Counterpublics, which are formed through the collective demand for participation, can contribute to the pluralization of discourses. Since the term counterpublic is sometimes misused to describe right-wing extremist discourse spaces, it is important to emphasize that in this context I am referring to counterpublics that are oriented toward democratic values, such as liberty and equality for all. Counterpublics react to the exclusion mechanisms of the broader public sphere. The philosopher and political scientist Nancy Fraser refers to such groups as subaltern counterpublics. This is where disadvantaged groups that are almost invisible in dominant discourses can exchange ideas, express their needs, and question prevailing identity attributions. Through the collective differentiation from the dominant public sphere, in counterpublics, a we can emerge as a collective identity. In summary, counterpublics are groups of marginalized people who address strangers to draw attention to their neglected concerns. Addressing strangers distinguishes a counterpublic from a mere community. The fact that participants of idocs usually only take part in the project for a short time raises the question of the extent to which a virtual community can emerge. Following the philosopher Jean-Luc Nancy, who believes that community cannot be created intentionally but can solely be experienced through sharing, a form of communication, I argue that idocs only enable temporary community experiences. Nancy understands community as a process of incomplete sharing. He emphasizes that exchange processes take place between singularities, which, according to Nancy, can also include non-human actors such as technical entities. However, it does not seem appropriate to speak of virtual communities regarding the three idocs mentioned, because according to Howard Rheingold and Sebastian Deterding, virtual communities presuppose a network of long-term personal relationships. Such relationships rarely arise through temporary stays on the platforms of idocs, and are more likely to occur where social networks such as Facebook are used for the documentary project. This is why in the following I will focus on fleeting community experiences through the affordances of the web project and co-creative practices. To examine the extent to which idocs promote socio-cultural participation and community experiences, the methodological approach must focus on both the practices within the projects and the forms of expression in which the practices manifest themselves. For this purpose, I combine an analysis of the content, aesthetics, and affordances with a praxeological analysis. The praxeological approach provides information about production, distribution, and usage practices. It examines everyday actions that establish a reciprocal relationship between humans and media. These practices can be analyzed using media ethnographic approaches or paratexts and documents. In the following analyses, I will draw on pre-existing interviews with the initiators, statements from participants of the 𝗖𝗂𝗰𝗋, and, in the case of Startup Stories, my own interview with 𝗤𝘂𝘂𝗀, executive producer of the project. Startup Stories, initiated by Ryan Jones, Rafi Copeland, and the non-profit organization 𝗏𝘂𝘂𝗀 in 2013, aims to amplify the voices of the residents living in the refugee camp in Dadaab and to draw attention to everyday life and the creative side of the camp. To this end, 𝗏𝘂𝘂𝗀 provided the camp residents with cameras and donated smartphones so that they could film themselves. The project website presents many colorful self-produced videos. The idea was to create counter-images to the images of crises disseminated by mass media and to enable the marginalized group of refugees, who in some cases have lived in Dadaab for decades, to express themselves creatively. For example, some refugees produced a video about a youth group of musicians and dancers in the camp, which was published under the title Rappers on the 𝗖𝗂𝗰 website via YouTube embedding. In this video, they showcased their talents through self-representation, while, according to empirical studies, Western media coverage often portrays refugees solely as passive victims. Startup Stories tries to focus on what is hidden in the dominant culture, for example in the video Bicycle Repair, in which a refugee presents his bicycle garage in the camp and his dream of a larger garage. Or in the video The Gym, in which a self-built gym is shown with the refugees being active in sports. The marginalized camp residents come together in a small counterpublic to draw the attention of outsiders worldwide to the neglected concerns, talents, and dreams. Such videos allow the camp to be perceived differently than through mass media representations. Referring to Rancière, it can be argued that the not yet seen and not yet heard are made visible and audible, and that, through their self-representations, the participating refugees attempt to intervene in the prevailing mass media order, which marginalizes the voices of refugees and dehumanizes them. However, this potential for intervention was not fully exploited for two reasons. Firstly, according to the initiator 𝗤𝘂𝘂𝗀, there was a lack of financial resources to disseminate the counter-discourses widely and reach a large audience through advertising. Secondly, the participating refugees do not all present themselves as intended. The ironic design team that created Startup Stories explains, "We did not want the people of the camp to be defined by darkness and despair." Yet, some camp residents focus on suffering, so that their videos do not intervene in the existing order. One example is the video Floods of El Niño about flooding in the camp, which shows the refugees as passive victims. If we follow the philosophical approaches discussed, this does not promote socio-cultural participation because the video reproduces dominant patterns of representation. The video Floods of El Niño shows the second goal of the Startup Stories project. The practices of doing documentary were also intended to facilitate exchange processes among the residents of the camp, which had a population of up to 500,000 refugees at times. Communication in the camp became difficult, so the residents were asked to use the videos to inform each other and share their experiences. In Floods of El Niño, the refugees speak in their own language and give advice to other residents. However, community experiences through sharing in the sense of Jean-Luc Nancy by circulating such videos online did not take place in the camp. Many residents had no internet access or device to watch the videos, as 𝗤𝘂𝘂𝗀 reported in a personal conversation. Communication within the community took place more easily through a printed newspaper. The Startup Stories website was therefore of little use to the participants on site and their exchange, but was aimed at an external audience with an internet-enabled device. Community experiences arose rather through the joint production of the videos. With the videos, the refugees pursued the collective goal of opposing prevailing identity attributions, such as the frequent depiction of refugees as a homogeneous group. The dialog Question Bridge Black Males, initiated by Chris Johnson and others in 2012, invites black men to ask each other questions or to respond to existing questions. This takes place indirectly through question and answer videos on the website. Some videos were also recorded by the initiators in the USA. Many other videos were contributed online by users. On the one hand, the aim was to promote intergenerational dialogue within the male African American population. On the other hand, Black Americans who did not see themselves adequately represented in the dominant culture could demand their socio-cultural participation and deconstruct stereotypes. In the About section of the dialog, it says, "There are effective means of overcoming our negative bias about black males, one of which is being exposed to more complex, multifaceted, and whole images and narratives." One of the initiators explains that Question Bridge serves as a safe setting for honest expression, healing dialogue, and understanding within a community. There is indeed an honest exchange between the participants, who open up to each other and give each other advice. Darren Simon, for example, asks, "How do I know she's the one?" In addition, the black men collectively address how they are often portrayed and thereby differentiate themselves from white men, which allows them a collective identification and a sense of togetherness, a we group, within an emerging, subaltern counterpublic. One example is the question, why is the portrayal of black men different from white men? Some similar experiences of the black man enable them to feel part of a community. Eternal Paul, for example, asks in a video, "Am I the only one who has a problem eating chicken, watermelon, and bananas in front of white people?" 𝗵𝗿 replies, "You are not the only one, brother, to be honest." The sharing of experiences in the sense of Jean-Luc Nancy enables a temporary community experience. Mandy Rose recognizes a parallel to community media. The indirect dialogue gives the impression of a real exchange, with participants looking directly into the camera as they ask and answer questions. There was a direct exchange too. In numerous local events, such as exhibitions, the Question Bridge videos served as a basis for further discussions and stronger community experiences. Question Bridge's attempt not to portray black men as a monolithic group succeeds, particularly through the profile view. The individual videos of various black males break with this image by moving the individuals into the realm of the visible and audible in the sense of Rancière. They demand their cultural participation with the help of the Question Bridge forum. In addition, the diversity of black masculinity is emphasized through identity tags, which participants define before posting a video. For instance, husband, student, loyal, artist, educator, entrepreneur, writer, gay. However, the project can only partially convey images other than stereotyping mass media representations, as it sometimes reproduces these stereotypes, for example through generalizing questions such as, "Why do blacks fight in public places?" or "Why do we still smoke crack?" What is important to address for the healing internal exchange can lead to false conclusions for an external audience, because there is a tendency to want to confirm one's stereotypes as category-based expectations, which is called confirmation bias. This shows that the group-specific intention and the aim of a counter-discourse are sometimes difficult to reconcile. The G-Word Transforming Gender Norms One Story at a Time, initiated by Ashita Srivastava and the global human rights organization Breakthrough in 2015, is a platform that aims to act against restrictive gender norms by drawing attention to the impact of these norms. To this end, people affected by gender discrimination and gender-based violence can share video, audio, image, and text contributions on the website in which they document their experiences. Users can comment on these posts with emojis and text. Everything that is published on the platform goes through a review process to provide a protected space for those concerned to share their experiences. This already shows that those affected are the primary target group of the project. The call for participation states, "Gender norms divide us, stories unite us." This motto is expressed in the form of the 𝗖𝗂𝗰𝗋. It uses the networking potential of the digital to link individual contributions on similar topics and thus visualize the connectedness of the participants. Once you select a contribution in the documentary narrative network, the 𝗖𝗂𝗰𝗋 shows connections to contributions with the same tags. This enables participants to position their experiences within a larger network. The participants are not alone in their story. This is also visualized by displaying the connected stories under each post. In addition, emojis at the top right of each contribution indicate that others empathize with the participants. In the text comments, similarities in experiences and advice are shared. Examples include comments such as, "I'm not alone, I have very similar experiences to you," or "I'm so sorry that happened to you, I believe in you," or "You have to let him go before he puts his hand on you." In the 𝗔_word, the interplay between the platform's affordances, the content, and the participants can lead to community experiences. As a non-human actor in the process of sharing, according to Jean-Luc Nancy, the interface, which makes connectedness experienceable, contributes to the sense of community. However, the platform has limited potential for intervention. The initiator Srivastava intended to problematize mainstream narratives about gender and challenge socially anchored gender norms, but there were two problems in doing so. Firstly, the platform was mainly visited by people who were already dealing with the topic of gender. Secondly, the public exchange about gender norms in the 𝗔_word mainly presents stories of suffering, for example, experiences of discrimination due to deviation from norms. These negative stories are less suitable for counter-discourses. For Srivastava's goal to envision a better world, stories of a supportive social environment and a happy life that does not conform to the norm could be more useful. The analysis has shown that Dada Stories was designed less for the needs of the participants than for a Western audience to be presented with a new facet of the refugee camp. In the case of 𝗏, the relation is more balanced. The project facilitates exchange between the participants just as much as it redefines black male identity in America for an external audience, despite the limitations mentioned. The 𝗔_word is more strongly oriented towards a community of affected participants and less targeted at an external audience. Even if the project aims to problematize gender norms, the focus is primarily on those concerned, sharing their experiences. This does not necessarily promote societal transformation. This contribution has revealed that an unreflected approach to stereotypical self-images and prevailing narratives is counterproductive to the goal of promoting socio-cultural participation. In exchanges between those affected, it can be helpful to talk about one's suffering. However, this is not conducive to counter-discourses to stereotypical media representations that, for example, only focus on the need for help. Future research should therefore take a close look at the objectives of committed documentary projects and what the participation of those concerned actually looks like. Not every socially committed documentary project has the potential to change society. Often there are small changes, such as coping with one's experiences by doing documentary together with other people affected.